My mom and my dad would say, work hard, otherwise you won't survive. You're in the US, you're in a new country, you need to work hard so you can survive. So I had that kind of imprinted in my brain. So stress really is that disconnect from baseline. To me, it's when the demands placed on the organism are more than the organism can handle. And we're all kind of uniquely packaged in a specific way. And this unique physiology can only take on so much. And when the physiology is in excess of what it's being given, and sometimes what we're giving ourselves is coming from our own head. It's our own thoughts and our own push and our own drive that pushes us out of alignment, not what's happening externally.
In your view, what are the biggest blind spots in the Western model when it comes to stress, especially for high-functioning people who still look fine from the outside?
But too much fire, you start to get short-tempered. You start to get nausea and reflux. You start to get diarrhea. The gut and the brain are connected. The mind and the gut are connected. Emotions and physical are one in Ayurveda.
Fitness is actually very easy to do, but the mental state is the most important thing, because mindset is, I'm going to go to bed on time, I'm going to follow my meal plan, and I'm not going to eat Cheetos, puka pies, and Doritos, right? Hey Conscious Man 7 family, quick question before we start. Do you love the depth of these conversations but hate when ads break the flow? I get it. Ads can feel like speed bumps on a highway, pulling you out of that deep zone. That's why we created a way for you to enjoy every episode completely ad-free while supporting the show at the same time. For just a few bucks a month on Patreon or Locals, you'll get full access to uninterrupted episodes. You'll get direct access to me so you can ask me any questions that you have, some cool other perks like early releases, and you'll also help us keep bringing you the powerful conversations that mainstream platforms won't touch. The link is in the show notes. Join us there and be part of this movement. Ever look up and see those dull, grey skies streaked with chemtrails, and you feel your energy sink? You're not imagining it. Something in you knows the sky isn't supposed to look that way. But what if you could bring back the blue? What if there was a way to clear the air inside you and above you? That's where the Chembo comes in. They create powerful orgonite, tools that generate orgone energy, the life force that helps neutralize EMFs from your mobile phone, your Wi-Fi, and even 5G. It's nature's way of restoring balance, bringing cleaner air, calmer energy, and deeper sleep. Every piece from the Chembo is handmade, from tactical tower busters to beautiful pyramids and jewelry, crafted with the precise ingredients to generate real orgone energy. And here's the best part. They've proven it. For over 10 years, they've cleared thousands of miles of chemtrails, bringing the blue back to the skies around the world. So if you're ready to take back your weather and your well-being, go to thechembo.com. Use coupon code CM7 for 10% off and experience the shift for yourself. Don't fear the chemtrails or the EMF. Be empowered with the Chembo and never feel helpless again. If you are new to this podcast, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and to share, because that helps us to be recommended in the algorithms. If you would like to support this podcast, please check out our merch store on Amazon with the brand Todd and Me. We've got some cool t-shirts, tank tops, hoodies, and sweaters. Link will be in the description of this podcast. And if you're now starting a spiritual journey, you would like to start a spiritual journey, or you're currently on a spiritual journey and you would like some help removing some fears and traumas, please hit me up on my Instagram at Adriano_246 and it will help you to get some magic mushrooms. Enjoy the show and stay tuned, because we have some more great content coming soon. What if the stress running your life is not random? What if the anxiety, the irritability, the exhaustion, the gut issues, the insomnia, the brain fog, even the version of you that people think is just your personality is actually a pattern? Today's guest is Dr. Trupti Gokani, board certified neurologist, Ayurvedic expert, mindset coach, and author of The Stress RX. Her work bridges Western neurology with ancient healing wisdom to ask a deeper question most modern medicine never fully answers. Not just what is wrong with you, but why are you living this way in the first place? Her own journey into this work began when brutal insomnia hit during her first year of medical school. Sleeping pills failed, a quick depression diagnosis did not feel true, and the crisis forced her to question everything she had been taught about health, stress, the body, and the mind. In The Stress RX, She goes further into trauma, subconscious patterning, the gut-brain connection, the three-brain model, and how healing is not just a symptom relief, but a return to who you actually are beneath survival mode. If you have ever felt high functioning on the outside, but deeply out of alignment on the inside, this conversation may explain more about your life than you expect.
When truth is blurred by lies and misinformation, perception becomes reality. What will you perceive your reality to be?
Liberate your fears and walk with me.
Sit down and meditate. Connect with your soul.
Be a monster and then learn how to control it.
You got to be willing to do the work.
So it really goes really deep in terms of words and etymology and what they mean. So this is why it is really hard to really crack the matrix, because there's so many levels and layers to it, Dr. Trupti, welcome to the Conscious Man 7 podcast. How are you today?
Thank you so much for having me in that beautiful introduction. Grateful to be here.
Yes, I'm really interested to talk to you today because when we met and you shared the things that you are into, I found it fascinating because it looks at things from the same place that I look at things, but from a deeper perspective. And that is always something that really interests me, because I always see a lot of the cause of a lot of our problems start with the body. But you take it to a deeper level than that. And I was really keen to have you on the show when you had said to me that you would like to share what you do with my audience. So here we are, and I'm really happy to be here talking with you. So let's dive right in. So let's talk a little bit about your background so people can get context on, your journey and, why you are the way you are and the things that you share. So take us back to the first year of medical school when insomnia hit. What was collapsing underneath the surface of your life before you had the language to call it stress?
Yeah. So when I go back to that time, which is about 30 years ago, we didn't discuss stress and mindset and gut health like we discuss it now. So take you back 30 years. That time, all I knew is I was struggling. I was having problems falling asleep and then falling and staying asleep. And then eventually I wasn't sleeping at all. And I'd gone 3 months without sleeping. And I was close to quitting medical school. I actually thought that whatever this ailment was, there's no way I could function and reasonably get through my medical training. So I was close to quitting. And that was when I went to see first a therapist. First stop was a therapist who asked me if I was stressed, and my response was no, because I don't think I knew what stress was at that time. I didn't have any idea how to define it. And I didn't think that I would fit that stress situation because I was doing well in school and my family was doing well and I had a nice home life. And I thought, I can't be stressed. So she gave me a couple of techniques to work on and sent me away, said your mental health seems good and you don't seem stressed and let's move on, And then my father, who's a physician, did my exam and my labs. Everything was normal, as they said 30 years ago. And he said, there's nothing wrong with you. You don't have diabetes or blood sugar issues or thyroid issues. And, not sure why you're not sleeping well. And then eventually, because of desperation, I went to see the psychiatrist, as you mentioned. And the psychiatrist in 10 minutes offered me Prozac. And what was fascinating about that whole experience is I had never actually been a patient. My dad I was grateful, was able to write out my school forms. So I need to have those filled out by the physician. And I did my routine checks, but I really never saw the physician, unless I needed to for vaccinations or any kind of routine visits. And so this was the first time here I was sitting there with the physician as the patient and juxtaposition that with being a first-year medical student. So it was a really interesting, time of so many different perspectives of coming in as a medical student, coming in as a patient, receiving information from the physician, and then walking out of the physician's office and saying, I actually don't agree. I don't align with what you're saying. And that was probably the first time in my life I actually disobeyed. I was a very obedient young lady, you know? And I disobeyed. And I said, I'm not taking this prescription. He gave me Prozac. And I said, Got to my car and I ripped it up, threw it in the cup holder. And I drove away. And I said, I'm not sure where I'm going. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to take that prescription. And something inside of me, my gut intuition was very strong that that path was not going to lead me the right direction. So fast forward, went to the bookstores, found Eastern medicine at that time, studied it voraciously. I think I've spent more time studying those books than I did my anatomy and histology books. And within a month, I was sleeping again. And here I am, 54, no medications, moods have been great, and sleeping well. So I can tell you, I'm glad I followed my gut. Yet it wasn't easy to do that at that time.
So that's really interesting. So, there had to be something inside of you. What in you knew even then that the label that they were giving you, you were depressed, was too shallow for you to actually be living through that?
I think I remember on the drive over to the psychiatrist's office, in my mind, and mind you, I'd never really sat with a physician, right? So I thought, oh, this is going to be so interesting. I'm going to sit there and we're going to delve, go into deep conversation. He's going to ask me all these questions and we're going to get to the root of this. So somehow in my early 20s, this is before I knew anything about functional medicine and root cause medicine, I just thought to myself, there's got to be a deeper truth, right? Beyond the symptoms. And it was just, a feeling I had that there's a deeper story. And when I sat down and he asked me, which is actually today still used, this, acronym for diagnosing depression, it's actually 8 specific questions. And he asked me those 8 questions. Do you feel, it's Siggy caps, do you feel sad? Do you have insomnia? Do you have guilt? Do you have low energy? Do you have low concentration? He asked me these specific questions and I said yes to 6 out of 8. And he said, oh, well, you have major depression. Here's Prozac. And it was so quick and so fast, almost in a blink of an eye, I walked out with a prescription and a diagnosis sent on my way. And I thought, well, wait. What I had is envisioning this deep conversation that I thought we'd be having about something so difficult for me. It had been 3 months of not sleeping. How was that assessment made in such a short period of time? And I remember when I was answering, so he said, do you feel, low energy? That's one of the questions, right? And I said, yes, but. I remember I wanted to explain that. I said, yes, but it's because I haven't been sleeping for 3 months. I kept wanting to add more. And he said, no, just yes or no. I remember him keep saying to me, just say yes or no, yes or no, yes or no. And I just didn't align. I said, there's more to this story that we're not sharing. And so I knew that there was something being missed in that visit. I didn't quite know he was using that Siggy caps acronym. I didn't know what he was doing with those questions. I just knew that there was more to the story and I wasn't being allowed to tell it. And that's when I walked out, I kind of felt like I wasn't heard. And when you feel like you're not heard, your gut very clearly tells you, that experience wasn't a full experience and there's more to this. And then I said, let me go search. And I walked into the self-help section of the bookstore, and found my answers.
So when you tore up your prescription, was that the first time you trusted your inner knowing over authority? And if so, was that the first crack in your identity of being the good girl that follows the rules, as you put it?
I think so. Yeah. When I think about it, I think that was probably the first time I kind of, in my mind, broke a rule. That was a big, and mind you, this was one of my father's trusted friends. So I was almost disobeying my father, and we parental influences and being the good kid. That was a very big step to take for me to do that, because that meant that my own perception of the reality was different than a guided wisdom keeper that I thought, would have more of a perception of my truth. And I followed my truth over that truth, which was a big deal.
Yeah, I can imagine, because, I have had friends that who used to just follow the rules, and they would absolutely freak out of the idea of even having to break a rule, even if it didn't make sense. So it had to be some real internal conflict going on inside of you at the same time. but at the same time, you knew this deeper knowing that something isn't right here, and that must have been, I won't say terrifying, but I would say very unsettling, no, at the time.
Completely unsettling. And mind you, I'm a first-year medical student, so I have this experience that I thought to myself, is this what medicine is? Is this how medicine is practiced? And this is what I'm studying to become? And so I was originally, when I was in college, I was in the business school, and actually shifted out of the business school because I really do love science. And I shifted into economics and biology. I did a double major, and I shifted out of the business school. That was pretty much all business classes, accounting and finance and all of that. And I thought, let me give myself some more freedom and study more things. And I'll do this double major so I can study science. And then I decided to go to medical school. A lot of my family members were physicians, friends were physicians. To me, being a physician was kind of the norm because a lot of people were physicians. So I took that path. And then this is that first time where I realized, this is actually how doctors practice. And this is how they see patients. And I thought, I don't know if I agree with that either. So I didn't agree with the diagnosis and the prescription. And also I didn't agree with the model as it was. So talk about being unsettling. I felt as though I don't even know if I'm in the right place. And a lot of people can feel that. They've felt that in any place that they've been in early times, be it with friend circles, be it with choices of colleges or, of course, career. You're wondering, am I doing the right thing for me? And that's where I get deeper into the whole concept of Dharma and following your own unique path. And I really do believe I was being tested. I was being tested to see whether or not was I going to stay on that path? And if so, what was I going to do down the road if this path didn't align with my truth and who I was, and my mission?
Yeah, your story is quite powerful and interesting because you did not reject Western medicine. You rejected stopping at symptom management. What did that season teach you about the difference between treating a condition and understanding a human being?
A lot. I think in that very short, and I'm glad it was short, 10-minute visit, because it really woke me up. And I was already an insomniac, so I already had problems falling asleep. But I was even more awakened to the truth that if that's how Western medicine is practiced, there isn't an opportunity to get to know the whole person in that short period of time. There's absolutely no way. And I'd always been a deeper thinker. My best friend growing up was a very deep thinker. She's actually a PhD and, does a lot of mindfulness-based work now. And her and I would get into these deep conversations about things and looked at things in a very holistic way. And so when I realized that medical practice as it was set, was very reductionistic to some degree, very much quick, fast, make a diagnosis, give a pill, and let's not go deeper than that. And I didn't even know anything about, Eastern medicine or functional medicine or taking a supplement. I mean, this was not in my world. I wasn't taking supplements growing up, I was grateful to have a mom who was a phenomenal cook. And so she made amazing food every single day. I had amazing food. So thankfully I had amazing opportunity to strengthen and, help my microbiome develop over those years, because it wasn't me taking things and doing things that were, difficult. It was just simply I was in a nice home environment. But this was the biggest piece of it, was that in that Western model, there wasn't an understanding of the whole self. There wasn't a deeper quest to understand, how was my mind doing? How was my gut doing? How was I functioning in the world that I was living in? Was this world that I was in the right world for me? Was there a conflict, with being in medical school? And maybe that was why I was having problems sleeping. None of that was brought up. And this is a psychiatrist, So I didn't know where that answer was going to come from. It didn't come from the therapist. The therapist never asked me, hey, do you think maybe med school isn't the right place for you? Maybe you have chosen a profession that isn't aligned with you. I would have loved to delve into that at that stage, but I didn't. I kind of had to start doing that on my own, with my own work.
Your story, what you shared just now, is one of the reasons why most of my listeners and people in my circle personally, we don't go to the doctor and we don't trust Western medicine. Western medicine is great for surgeries and that kind of stuff, like procedures, but the curing of the human being is terrible. And I hardly ever go to the doctor, to be honest with you. Like when I'm sick, I take like herbal remedies and stuff like that. I eat very well. And, especially now, is absolutely frightening that you would go in to see a doctor well and come out even more sick, And, this is well known now, but then, you're saying 30 years ago, this was not even a concept that people would even entertain, because it would just be, okay, well, the doctor says do that and I'll do that. And just like you, I never used to follow rules. If they didn't make sense to me, I just simply would disobey, because for me, it was all about making sense. So, it is something that is very interesting, the whole healthcare in the world, because in reality, what you said just now about, you came up in a good house with food. And I always say to people that over 90% of all ailments are caused by poor nutrition. And if you have proper nutrition, yes, you can get sick, but it would be just a fleeting something. It wouldn't be like an autoimmune something. It wouldn't be something that is continuous and stuff like that, So that is a really key, important point.
Yeah.
So a lot of people today misunderstand stress in today's modern world, because I guess, it's something that we seem to be born with in our perception of reality. So one of the strongest ideas in your work is that many people do not know they're stressed because stress has become their normal. How dangerous is that when dysfunction starts to feel like personality?
Yeah. It's a big problem and it's dangerous, very dangerous, because when we're not in tune with and aware of the way we operate in this world, we lose sense of our own unique reality. And what I mean by that is, so many of us, and that was me for so many years, live in a space where we're so focused on the outer world, so focused on serving, so focused on doing and being for everyone else. And early years, it's academics. And, for me, it was succeeding, getting into good medical school, becoming a doctor. There are all these goals. And the importance at that time was to make sure that I could succeed in this very difficult world. And I'll back up to say, I was actually smuggled out of Africa, before age 1. I'm Indian of origin, but born in East Africa in Kampala, Uganda. And I was brought to the US with already a survival mentality, because my mom and my dad would say, work hard, otherwise you won't survive. You're in the US, you're in a new country, you need to work hard so you can survive. So I had that kind of imprinted in my brain. And, as a neurologist, I'll say that between 0 to 10, I don't think I've realized this until much later in my practice, between ages 0 to 10, we're all kind of in this theta brainwave pattern, delta theta brainwave pattern, where we're like sponges absorbing the energy of the world around us, right? So if my mom is saying the world is a dangerous place, I believe the world is a dangerous place, because that's all I've heard, my early life. Or if my mom says you have to work hard, otherwise you will not survive, and that's the mantra in the household, well, that's what I absorbed to be my truth. So what happens is we start to shift out of our birth state, which is in Ayurveda, the most ideal state is the state at birth that we're in, the energetic state at birth. And we start to move out of alignment and move into a state that reflects the environment we're in, because we have to live in authenticity with that environment. But the problem is we're not being authentic to ourselves. We're being authentic to the environment, and the environment, what it wants from us, we become oftentimes without even realizing. It's subconscious, right? So we start to slowly, and this starts at a very young age, kind of become another individual. And we don't even recognize ourselves. So that's why when the therapist asked me, are you feeling stressed? That was the only world I knew. All I knew was to work hard, to push hard. I was a perfectionist. I was nonstop, go, go, go. That's the only world I knew. So that was my perception of me, was the normal me. That's who I was. So when she said, are you feeling stressed? I said, no. I look back at the me then, I was so stressed out. I was a first-year medical student, so you can just assume I was stressed out. But I was, going to bed at 3 a.m. I was skipping my meals. I was drinking coffee. I was kickboxing in my free time when I should have been doing something a little more gentle and restorative. And I don't think I had any off time. It was on and go and go. And even in the weekends, I lived, in Chicago. I remember going out with my friends and going to the clubs and being out till 3 a.m. I mean, I never, ever reset. My poor adrenal system had no choice but to show danger signals, right? And give me the insomnia. I'm grateful for it, because that whole experience of having sleep issues was for me to literally wake up to my own reality of how imbalanced I was. So stress really is that disconnect from baseline. To me, it's when the demands placed on the organism are more than the organism can handle. And we're all kind of uniquely packaged in a specific way. And this unique physiology can only take on so much. And when the physiology is in excess of what it's being given, and sometimes what we're giving ourselves is coming from our own head. It's our own thoughts and our own push and our own drive that pushes us out of alignment, not what's happening externally. Then that's when the disconnect happens, and that's when stress really occurs. And that shows up physiologically in your gut, in your mind, in your body. And the beauty is the system is going to share with you. It's going to give you signals before things get too bad. So you mentioned autoimmune disease. There's going to be signs and warnings that are being given. Yet are we listening is the question, right? Are we being mindful?
It's true. Like, the body, when you look at it, is a fantastic piece of equipment, because it flashes amber, then it flashes orange, then it flashes red,
Yes.
then it screams at you, and then it breaks down. So
Exactly.
to be fair, we do have enough time to change things. But I think it's a situation of a lack of knowledge, because we tend to live in a lot of ignorance to these things, because, and the thing what you said is so true. We are basically products of our environment. And just look at like the different English accents or Spanish accents or Portuguese accents in the world. Because you live in a certain geographical location, your way of pronouncing certain words will be based on the environment that you're in. So when you take that now to another level, or to the other side in terms of stress, it means then that you are born coming into, yes, you have to work harder, you have to be better, you can't fail. So you get that fear and stress injected in you from very young age, that the body just adapts and thinks is normal. But in reality, the body is not designed to handle that stress for prolonged periods of time. And I think that is the major issue we have now, is that our environment puts us in that stressful state for too long. So these things become chronic, right? And then by the time it gets like the body screaming at you, it is like almost too late, because so much damage has been done. And, like, I think stress is probably one of the biggest killers in the world, to be honest with you.
It is. It is. Absolutely.
No,
It is.
Now, you also challenge the modern medical habit of waiting until symptoms become severe. Have we created a culture that only respects the body once the problem becomes expensive, embarrassing, or impossible to ignore?
Yeah, and we have. And I think so. And when I speak to a lot of practitioners that are integrative functional medicine practitioners, you'll hear stories where, they got into this world, into the functional medicine world, because of healing themselves, because their symptoms had gotten so severe and they developed a disease. I'm so grateful I didn't develop a disease. I had 3 months of insomnia. And I guess I woke up pretty quickly to the reality, I better do something about this, and I took action, and I was aggressive about it. And I made sure that I got the tools I needed to bring myself back into alignment. And the norm is, like you said, most are waiting far too long. And by the time individuals show up in the physician's office, sometimes it's just, there's no choice but to prescribe a medication. Yet I will say, even after running a clinic for almost 2 decades, and I had patients that came in from all over the world that had very complex neurological conditions, I still felt that there was a space and place for Eastern medicine, for functional medicine, for good nutrition, for stress management, to help reduce the need for as many pharmaceuticals, or maybe even improve the efficacy of the drugs, and to reduce side effects, of the medication. So I still will say that you kind of need to blend. And you were talking earlier about blending East and West. It's really important to blend both and to realize that if you're catching things early. I was lucky. I was in my early 20s and I caught things pretty early, and I was able to reverse it with 3-4 different Ayurvedic principles. And I stopped kickboxing. I started doing some yoga. I changed my diet. I changed the way I approached my bedtime routine. I made, quite a few changes, but they weren't tremendously difficult. It was just a few changes. Yet I was young and I was able to get back into a sleep pattern again. Yet if you're waiting until the severity is much more intense, and I always tell, I have taken care of a lot of migraine patients. I was telling my migraine patients, I said, hey, were there times where you just had like a few tension headaches, little mild headaches, that occurred occasionally? And do you recall that time? And they said, yeah, in my teens. Oh yeah, I've always gotten headaches. Yeah, since I was like 12. They're seeing me in their 30s, right, with these severe migraines. And I said, well, what did you do about those tension headaches? What was the rationale for getting tension headaches? And I remember so many people saying to me, well, doesn't everyone get a headache? Like, isn't that just so normal? And I think what we've done is we've normalized symptoms and just said, I was at a meeting with a lot of ladies who are kind of around my age in their mid-50s talking about hormonal symptoms, because it's a big topic right now. And the speaker asked the group, how many of you have, hot flashes and sleep issues? And, everyone's raising their hand. I was the only one that didn't raise my hand. I'm 54 and I don't have any symptoms. I'm grateful for that. But I know why, as I follow a lot of rules that are taught in Eastern medicine. And the speaker said, well, it's normal. Everyone has hot flashes. Everyone has. So even she was saying it's normal to have a hot flash. It's not normal. It isn't. But we've become, as a society, we're normalizing things. It's normal to have poor sleep. Oh, it's normal to get headaches. Oh, it's okay. Yeah, you can get some, imbalances with your, heat regulation, thermal regulation center. You're going to get hot flashes and feel hot. That happens when you're in your 50s. No, it doesn't need to happen. I'm here to say absolutely not. We should not accept, I have sleep issues and headaches and hormonal issues. That is not acceptable. And I think we've gotten too normalized with this conversation, but it's okay to have symptoms. And that's where the problem is. So then people wait and they wait and they wait. And then they finally go in when they think it's valid to see the doctor, because now these symptoms are strong enough or severe enough that now I should go see a physician. And that's the wrong way to look at it.
That's really interesting what you shared just now, that in your 50s, you shouldn't have to have hot flashes, because, I've heard a few different podcasts with people talking about, women going into their 50s and approaching menopause, et cetera, and they've all said the same thing. So to hear you say that now is kind of like very interesting, because I don't think that, well, certainly I didn't think that you would not have it. And I think that most people and women would not think that you don't have to have them. So I guess then, do you mind sharing like the little principles or practices you do to prevent or combat those? Because I think that's quite interesting, because I've never heard of that before.
Yeah. And I will say something that happened actually about a month ago. So I've been traveling, quite a bit for the last 3 months. Actually just came back from Spain and Portugal. So I love that you brought that up. And I've been traveling quite a bit. And during one of the trips, we know travel can be challenging sometimes in the airport, and getting healthy food and the time and the flights and all that can throw the system off. And I had gone through kind of a rough patch of travel where I got back. And actually for 2 nights, I had night sweats. And it was miserable. I'm going to tell you, I woke up at 3 a.m, both of those nights. And after I returned, I was like, what is wrong with me? My husband said, you feel so hot. I said, I'm actually sweating. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. And I never experienced this, right? So then the next day called my sister. I said, oh my goodness, was that like a hot flash or a night sweat? And she's like, here it is. You got night sweats. And that thankfully only lasted 2 nights. And I haven't had it since then. And so I know it's possible. Like my system can generate that signal. And I realized very clearly I was incredibly taxed and stressed. I didn't eat well. I drank way too much coffee in the lounge in the airport. The time change. I don't think I slept at all, because it was one of those overnight flights, and I tried to stay awake the next day. And, my whole circadian rhythm was off. I'm big on having a daily bowel movement, and it was just so off and I didn't even know what time it was. So I was eating at the wrong time, drinking a lot of coffee, didn't have a proper bowel movement. I was off. And yeah, that's what generated the night sweats. So yeah, can they be generated? Sure. All of us can probably generate it, as women can generate, maybe men too can generate. Definitely if the hypothalamic rhythm is off. Yet I quickly got back into alignment with myself again. So what are the tricks and tools? I think first and foremost, I am a believer we need to first get to know ourselves, get to know, that we took up the Ayurvedic model of the 3 doshas or mind body types. Are you a more vata, air and space, kind of moving, going, doing type personality who is more of a smaller frame, active, musical, maybe someone that's very very into art and theater, and someone that has a really creative mind? That's the vata, moving, going, doing, individual in sales, or are they more the pitta, medium frame, muscular, kind of a little bit more type A, competitive, organized individual? Is that more your nature? Or are you more the kapha, the bigger frame, bigger mass, more relaxed, kind of the homemaker, introspective, doesn't talk a lot. The kapha, earthy type, doesn't talk a lot. The vata's talking a lot. What's your nature? And then start asking yourself, what type of life do I live? Do I live in alignment with that nature, or do I live in a life that is pushing that nature out of alignment? And that's where we kind of think about the stress personality, I call it. And I have a quiz on my website where I look at, what is your stress personality? You brought this up earlier. I think of the band Earth, Wind, and Fire. Are you earthy, windy, fiery? Do you run heavy, earthy, sluggish, congested, tired, gaining weight, Or are you more fiery, intense, angry, irritable, nausea, reflux, fiery, hot-headed, right? Or are you the more airy, airheaded, kind of windy type, where you kind of forget things, you have anxiety, you're more cold, you tend to kind of go into freeze, neck is tight, colon is tight, constipated, gas, and bloated. So first step is to look at your state. And I, in my early 20s, when I was journeying through my sleep issues, figured out that I was quite windy and vata imbalanced. And the sleep issues were because my system was constantly on. Vatas like to keep moving. I never sat and ate lunch. I didn't get to bed at a reasonable hour, which is 10 p.m., 10 or 11 p.m. I was sleeping at 3 a.m. I was missing the entire window between 10 p.m. and 2 is when your liver cleanses. I was completely missing that window. And I told you I was kickboxing, which is a movement type exercise. My system was craving quiet, craving less movement, craving stillness. And my mind was constantly going. My body was constantly going. I was drinking iced coffees. Last thing I should have been doing in February, January, December in Chicago, when these sleep issues were occurring, I was drinking iced beverages, warm and cooked in terms of foods and drinks. So when it comes to what do you do for hormone balance, you first have to start to get to know, what state was I born in? Where am I now? And what can I do to bring myself into alignment? And when you get into alignment, the most important thing happens. Your hypothalamic, pituitary adrenal, hypothalamic, pituitary ovarian axis goes into harmony. And when your HPA and your HPO axis are in alignment for years, your body then can go through perimenopause and menopause without so many symptoms. I'm not going to say never, that I'll never have symptoms. I'm just saying right now I'm 54 and I'm doing pretty well. My last cycle was 3 months ago. Maybe at 55, maybe by a year from now, I can say I'm menopausal when I hit that 12-month mark. But I'm feeling really good, considering I'm sleeping well and my moods are great. And, it's just interesting because, again, it's become normalized that you're supposed to have symptoms during perimenopause and menopause. I think that's a fallacy. I think if you follow the rules and you know the rules, most important is you know the rules to follow, you can get to my age and not have to struggle. And I think that should be something that people know about at a younger age, so they're not getting to their 50s and going crazy with hormones, because I have too many people around me that are just struggling tremendously.
Wow, that was really interesting. And I've never heard it described like that. And, it kind of makes sense, because I realize in myself as a man where sometimes I gain weight or I lose weight simply because I'm not in balance. And it is not always due to my nutrition. It is due to sleep and stress. Because for a man, no, testosterone is super important for recovery, focus, drive, and just that hunger to keep pushing. But when you are in stress or you're worried, the testosterone drops. And then even though I may be eating well, I would gain a little bit of weight, and I'd be kind of like thinking about why. But then when I think back, I don't sometimes sleep enough. So I have to like force myself to sleep and stuff like that. So it is also very applicable to us men. So what Trupti is saying is very applicable on the flip side for men. But ours, I guess, is much more noticeable because testosterone is something that we have to keep having all the time, where you're only going to realize this about having the balance when you get into that stage of your life in the 50s, sometimes people late 40s as well. So it just goes to show you how balance is just like super important for the human being and how we function and affects everything in our life.
And there is an andropause, just like there's a menopause, I should say, right? So men very much in a similar way can drop out their hormones too early. We have male pattern baldness, we have weight gain, we have all the things that you see and, the male clients. And so, this living out of alignment with self affects everybody. It really doesn't matter what your gender is. Quite frankly, everyone, if they move in a state where they're out of alignment with their balanced personality state or balanced doshic state, then you can overtax the adrenal system. You overtax the adrenal system, then the hormones get depleted and your system as a whole becomes more inflammatory and you become more pro-inflammatory and you get joint pain and digestive symptoms and all of these things that start happening secondary to that. So absolutely affects all genders. And women, it's a little bit more noticeable because we go through that specific menopause where the ovaries are involuting. And we have differences in terms of exercise with our cycles, which I'd like to just mention. One of the things that I was really particular about was not always working out when I was told to work out. I remember at one point I was taking these classes. I had gotten back into, after my second child, into doing more kind of active exercising and doing some kind of heavy working out at that time. And I was very particular about the first 3 days of my cycle to be very gentle with myself and not do the exercising. And yet if I signed up for a class and I had to cancel the class, I remember this fitness place was like, oh, you can't cancel. It's less than 24 hours. And I was like, but I just got my period. And it was really hard to explain that, I really was trying to be mindful that this is a detox time. The first 3 days of the cycle is a time for the women's body to detoxify. And quite frankly, probably not a good idea to be doing heavy exertional exercise along with the week before the period. To be really mindful, the week after the period, you can be a little bit more intense with your exercise. And so, exercise should also be based on your cycle too. And it's very challenging, to explain that because for men, it's a little easier to keep a routine going. You can keep the same routine going every day, but then there are going to be days you're traveling. Like you said, you're stressed or you've had a busy time with your family or something has pulled you away. And even for you, even though you're not cycling, you probably shouldn't work out as hard that day. That should be a day you take it a little easy. Because again, at the end of the day, we don't want to run out of hormones when we get older, and nor do we want to deplete our adrenal system, which I wrote about in my first book. I wrote a book called Mysterious Mind, and I wrote about adrenal fatigue. And I found that 90% of my patients in my practice, now I will say they were migraine patients, but 90% of them had adrenals that were just completely shut off, and they weren't making enough cortisol. So it's important for everyone to realize this is going to affect every single person.
Very, very interesting. So in your view, what are the biggest blind spots in the Western model when it comes to stress, especially for high functioning people who still look fine from the outside?
Yeah, I'd say one of the biggest blind spots, number one, is asking the patient, the individual, if they feel stressed. That question, when it was asked to me, it's almost impossible when you're living in a personality to know that your personality you've had your entire life is imbalanced. And we're not going to often own that. If this personality has gotten me to that CEO level, I've become very successful with the personality, I'm not going to want to change that personality, right? So part of it is maybe a conscious choice to not want to shift it. And part of it's a subconscious. This is who I've been. I don't even know. So keeping in mind that at the physician's office, it's very difficult unless you do your own work. unless you get to know yourself. It's very hard for the physician to be able to ask you and for you to answer to the physician without doing your own homework on yourself. So get to know yourself first, because the physician's not going to be able to do that in the office. And then gut health is probably the top thing for me. And I'm kind of obsessed about gut health because I've been studying it for so long. And my daughter had headaches when she was 5 years old, and now she's 23. And at that time, the physician wanted to give her a medication, a daily medication for her headaches, because she was having a headache once a week. And I said, no, I think there's something with her gut. And I didn't know about these food intolerances at that time that could be existing. So this is something I wrote about in my first book too. I talked about how important it was to assess her food intolerances. And we found so many food intolerances. So they're hidden. She had a gluten, dairy, and egg intolerance in her early ages. And that's all she was getting at birthday parties was cake, ice cream, and, pizza. And that's all she was being exposed to. And so, the doctor, the physician isn't going to be able to assess that in a short visit. How healthy is your gut? This takes you to become introspective, for you to get to know your own habits and actually look at your elimination. Is it looking different? Does it smell different? Are you having more challenges? Is it shifting based on different things that you're doing, different things that you're eating, And so the two things I think is, number one, owning and knowing the stress state. Second thing is knowing your gut state. Those are probably the two big ones, I'd say. There's more, but those are probably the two big ones.
Okay. Now, you define health far beyond absence of disease. If someone has money, status, productivity, and a decent looking life, but no inner harmony, no emotional processing, and no real peace, are they healthy by your standard?
No, not at all. And even you look at the ancient Ayurvedic definition of health, and it includes contentment of mind, body, and spirit. It isn't just having a physical body that's healthy. It's having an emotional body that's healthy. And that's when you look at that true definition versus our more Western definition, which is being absence of symptoms and disease, which is so missing. The WHO has broadened the definition of health to encompass emotional, social well-being. We must incorporate the importance of our emotions and our sense of connectivity to the others and our connection to ourselves as an important piece of being fully healthy. We know too many people, I'm sure you've seen too, who look healthy on the outside, yet are completely unhealthy on the inside. And we see that they have high inflammatory markers. They're at risk. Maybe I just actually had recently a friend who was diagnosed with cancer, who is incredibly healthy from the outside. Yet there must be something on the inside that generated the cancer. And yet this individual works out, is fit, eats protein with every meal, is being very cautious about her sleep. And yet this happened. And so I know she's scratching her head saying, what's going on? And I really believe there's a piece in there that has to do with her sense of emotional health that most likely is not being addressed, right? And that's a piece that we must address.
It's very interesting that you said that, because I think it was like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, actually maybe even longer, 2019. So 7 years ago, I read an article and it said that the overwhelming majority of people who develop cancer have had a very stressful or traumatic experience between 6 to 18 months prior to them being diagnosed.
Wow.
Overwhelming. And what they're saying is that what happened is that event, whether it was loss of a family member, loss of job, bankruptcy, you name it, whatever for you was the most stressful, it pushed your body into such an acidic state that it just developed cancer. And the article said as well that it is not just the nutrition that's important, but it's the overall package of what is the thing that's giving you stress. If it is a fear or a trauma, heal that thing. And it would reduce the cancer itself. Plus, when you back it up with diet and nutrition and exercise, then you supercharge that. But they're saying that basically they stop short to say that cancer came from a mental issue. But the synopsis of it that I deduced was that it was more a mental issue than actually a physiological issue. But obviously, because the mind and the body are connected, because the trauma was so severe that it just like shattered the person's paradigm and they just simply didn't know how to cope. So the body produced cancer. And then obviously it just got worse and worse and worse. And they said that for the people that did confront the actual trauma that they had, there was overwhelming evidence to show that they not only went into remission, but they basically cured themselves. So
wow,
it's quite interesting what you shared just now, because it just jogged my memory on that, because a lot of us are walking around looking really fit. But I mean, as a person that, my business is pretty much online and I use social media a lot. I see a lot of people that I would say, just looking at their profiles and their behavior on social media, they're not healthy because they clear sort of imbalances internally, mentally and spiritually.
right.
So, what you're saying about the Ayurvedic way of describing health, I think is very poignant in terms of how it really is. Because I mean, you could be the fittest person out there, but like you said with your friend, she got cancer and she's probably struggling to figure out why. And I would bet my last pound that if she were to do a little bit introspection, 6 to 18 months prior, she had like some major traumatic experience. Maybe she didn't even share with anyone, or maybe she has, but she doesn't recognize that could point her in the right direction as what is causing it. Because cancers just don't come like that. It's trauma.
And I have to share, because I'm so glad you brought this up, such an important topic. When I first started studying and looking into stress, and I think we all are comfortable with this now, that when you look at doctor's visits, 75 to 90% of doctor's visits are due to a stress-related condition. If you look at why people are walking into the provider's office, the symptom that they're struggling with, pretty much most of these individuals are struggling with stress-induced symptoms. That is what the National Institute of Mental Health put that article and did that study many, many years ago. And then when you look further, you'll start to see that, like you mentioned, I remember reading a book it was Dr. Bernie Siegel. And it was one of the first books I'd read back in that time when I was struggling with my sleep issues. Actually, I found his books first before finding the Ayurvedic books. And he, was a cancer oncologist trained at Harvard, I believe, and was basically removing cancers surgically. Yet he was questioning why do people get cancer? And he started an entire program where he had individuals practice mindfulness-based techniques to imagine visualizing their cancers going away. And he had some really incredible, successful outcomes of patients where he started studying them and found that those that didn't want chemotherapy or didn't want to do the surgery, he was able to see reduction in cancers using mindfulness-based techniques. And when you look at his data, he found that most breast cancer patients, if I remember this correctly, he called them defensive repressors. He said these are women that repressed certain challenging times, and they became quite defensive when we're asked about different situations in their lives. He called them defensive repressors. And this is from 30 years ago, I read this book, right? And this data, this is from such a long time ago, to think he was studying this and he found these connections. And now, with all the data that we have, why are we not, spending more time in the physician's offices with talking through, hey, what brought you in? How has your life been? Like asking the question you have brought up so wisely, like, what's been the last 6 to 18 months been like for you? What have you been going through in the last couple of years? You've been coming up with these symptoms. Shall we address this? And if we can't address it, let's send you to somebody that can. And I do realize that it isn't as easy to get into a therapist nowadays, especially after the pandemic. But there are a lot of coaches, a lot of mental health workers, a lot of people that are out there that are available to provide some assistance. And I think it's so important that you bring this up, because we don't want to wait for the diagnosis. Nobody wants to wait for a diagnosis. Yet if you're somebody that's gone through something difficult, if you're somebody that hasn't processed something, and I trained in NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming. We can talk about that if we'd like to at some point. Neuro-linguistic programming, I became a master practitioner of it because I was so intrigued by the language patterns that we use to describe our reality. And the internal voice and the voice we use when we're describing situations in life and how we create stories about situations. And very often, if we have a challenge, what are we saying internally about that situation for months to years after the situation has ended that is keeping that dialogue alive in the subconscious mind, that is then generating disease many years down the road because we haven't let that situation go. We haven't forgiven, we haven't moved on. And if someone is unable to speak about something, when I was smuggled out of Africa, it was fascinating. Even though I don't remember it, I was less than a year old. I was about 6 months old. For the first good 25 years of my life, I didn't tell anyone I was smuggled out of Africa. I had such shame around it, and I couldn't talk about it. And so even though it wasn't trauma that I remembered, it was still traumatic to my system. And yet I talk about in the book a situation of a psychiatry resident who asked me about the Africa story, and I started crying, and I was crying and shaking and crying about it. And I was like, why am I crying? I don't even remember the story. But it had an effect on me and my nervous system because, your subconscious mind has a memory of things that at the conscious level, you may not remember, but your subconscious mind remembers it. So it's important to realize if it's something you're not talking about, there is trauma underneath it. And it's important to allow yourself to come to a place where you can speak about it without, really holding back the emotions that are surrounding the event.
Yeah, I totally agree. And what you shared about how a doctor visit should be, that actually makes more sense than just going in and telling them like what you're suffering from, because it's kind of a bit of a holistic approach where doctors will be sort of like therapists, coaches, mindset masters all at the same time. And I think that would make a lot more sense. Like, I would go to the doctor, and I don't go to the doctor really, if I could go and talk about those kind of things like that, because it would give me a lot of confidence that is not just trying to prescribe me a pill and get his cut from the prescription that he's going to give me, right? So I would feel more comfortable doing that than just going in there and taking a pill. And I don't go to the doctor. Like, I would get sick. I would have to be like, have like an infection where like, I think the last time I went to the doctor I went to the ENT, and I had an ear infection because I went to the pool. And for some reason, the water got trapped in my ear. And that was the last time. And that was like 5 years ago. But I don't go to the doctor because I don't trust doctors. And
I'm with you. Don't worry.
And it's working out quite well for me,
And it's kind of sad now, especially with ChatGPT. I'd taken my father-in-law to a physician, and he was asking about taking a supplement with the prescription. And quite frankly, the doctor's like, yeah, sure, go ahead, take them together. And I was like, okay, let's go back home and look this up, and did some research. And I said, hey, I'm gonna have you have some fun, because he had never used ChatGPT. I said, ask ChatGPT, ask Chat, what would you recommend? And he took a picture of the supplement and uploaded it to his phone, and then said, hey, Chat, I have these symptoms. I'm taking this prescription. What do you think about this product? Honestly, I mean, I hate to say it, but the answer was so much more thorough and detailed. And our system is just lacking in so much. And that's the other piece of it. If we get to number 3 with it, is how do you blend East and West? When patients start to ask questions, hey, if I work on CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, for my sleep versus take the Ambien prescription, what's the likelihood of this working versus this? And should I do both? Should I do one? Should I start here? We should be able to have these intelligent conversations in the office and say, hey, the data shows this is the data behind this either natural supplement or non-medication approach. And then here's the data over here. And if you combine both, this is my thought on that, because there aren't a lot of studies on combining both, but this is my thought. And this is my clinical experience with doing that, having patients do that. My clinic, I was blending East and West and magnesium with ashwagandha, with, a little bit of Botox injections. I was doing all sorts of things because I had complex patients that were coming in that had failed the Mayo Clinics of the world and failed different things. So I kind of was like, all right, y'all know I'm going to go out of the box. So here we go. I didn't have the data to support. All right. It would have been nice. It would have been great if I had data. Take exactly this amount of ashwagandha with exactly this amount of magnesium, and I'll do this amount of prescription, and you're going to be great. No, life is not that simple. I mean, medicine is not a cookbook. You don't have a recipe for everything. It's a lot of intuitive, a lot of this is what I feel. This is what I've seen. This is what I've noticed. But you have to be curious and you have to be willing to step a little bit, talk about rule breaking. Yeah. After that first step out of that doctor's office to my car and ripping up the prescription, that was the first time I broke that rule. And then I continued to do it from there on out because I realized, rules aren't always meant to be followed. Of course, to create order and create some harmony, you want to follow some rules, but you're not going to grow and evolve. That comfort zone, you got to go where magic happens, right? And magic doesn't happen in the comfort zone. You got to step out of that. And so I started realizing the more I stepped out of the box, I was doing IV nutrient therapy, hormonal balance therapy back in like 2005. When I hear about, bioidentical hormones now, I honestly was prescribing those back in 2005. So I've had a lot of experience with all this. And I was comfortable enough to say, hey, listen, I don't know the data on this. I don't know long-term risks. All I know is you're struggling. I read this. This seems to make sense. The data on this seems to make sense. Are you good with giving it a try? Patients say, sure, let's give it a try. Seems okay for me that you do that. Want to try it. And as long as you're working with your heart open and you want to help people, and you do it with the right intention, I think the beauty is that we can find ways to improve our systems without getting so heavy on the pharmaceuticals and so heavy on the Western approach. Like you said, it should only be there if you need it. You shouldn't be using it too early and too soon because that's where the problems occur. Antibiotic resistance, proton pump inhibitors, statin overuse, don't even get me started, but the number of things that we're doing that is harmful in the Western practice, it's making me very concerned if people don't start waking up to the reality that this isn't how it's supposed to be done. Acid blockers, for example, when you look at the original studies on using an acid blocker, proton pump inhibitors, 6 weeks to heal an ulcer for 6 weeks, not for years, unless there's really a reason to be taking these. So of course, as a physician, I'm going to say, check with your doctor first. Don't, because of what we're saying here, ever stop a medication without first checking with your physician. But please start asking questions. Start at least reading the other side of things. Read about the risks of long-term effects of some of these medications. And then ask, gosh, should I be doing this forever? This shouldn't be just an automatic refill every 3 months,
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the 3 stress types, because you had alluded to them earlier. Windy, fiery, and earthy. Break down the 3 stress patterns you teach: windy, fiery, and earthy. When someone goes out of balance, what does each one look like in real life?
Yeah, so this is all based on the model of Ayurveda, where we have 5 elements that make up our being. Every sentient living thing, be it a plant, an animal, has 5 elements: air, space, fire, earth, and water. That makes up who we are. And we're born into a certain constitution. Some of us have more air and space elements to our nature at birth. We're called the Vata, V-A-T-A, Vata types. We're the movers, the goers, the doers, okay? If you have more fire and water elements to your nature, you're more the Pitta, P-I-T-T-A, the Pitta type. A little bit more, as I mentioned earlier, competitive. Think of fire giving you the ability to see things. You're more direct. You're more organized. You're somebody that kind of see how things should go. You're great at running things and planning, and you're kind of driven a little bit more with that fire intensity. The earth and water type in balance is the Kapha, K-A-P-H-A, Kapha type. Grounded, bigger body frame, where the Pitta has a more muscular frame, the Vata has a smaller frame. And the Kapha is the grounded, introspected, kind of deeper thinker. So all 3 in balance are beautiful. So if you're born into a Vata, you're born into a Pitta, born into a Kapha, and you stay there, wonderful. The challenge with life is we don't stay in alignment with our nature because we don't know our nature at birth. We don't know what our dominant dosha, mind-body type, is. So we end up choosing foods, choosing friends, choosing careers that bring us out of alignment. And we don't know that we're moving out of alignment until we have a symptom, okay? So when we start having imbalance, I call these the stress personalities, we go into one of 3 states. Now keep in mind, your birth state doesn't equate your stressed state, meaning I can be a Vata personality at birth and become fiery in my nature. So just because you're born as one doesn't mean your stress state is that same state. You can go into any of these three states. So the windy state, what does that one look like? The windy state is one that is excess movement, constantly being on. Somebody that is overthinking, overdoing. They're the individuals that tell me there is absolutely no way I could do a 20-minute meditation or even a 5-minute meditation or even a gentle flow yoga class. I need to move. They're the ones that their mind is so restless, they have a hard time being out and about and letting someone else speak. They're always the ones talking. They're the ones that say yes to so many things. They have a hard time saying no. Very difficult with boundary setting. If someone says, let's go, okay, they feel like they need to go and move. All right? The windy energy ends up turning into, of the three states in terms of fight, flight, or freeze, windy, think about it as a stress state. When you go into that state and you stay there too often, too much movement, too much traveling, too much activity, you're not ever sitting down to eat your lunch. You're constantly moving. You're having cold and dry things. That'll actually move you into that state. You start to get anxious. You start to go into freeze state. The neck gets tight. The body gets tight. You start to get constipated. Wind brings air, gas, and bloating. And you get dry and cold. So if anyone's listening to this and starts saying, oh gosh, I feel sometimes I feel anxious. I have a hard time warming myself up. I feel very cold. I feel very dry. I'm having a hard time settling in, and if you're the one that just can't sit still, you have a lot of wind. Wind individuals in neurological perspective start to have a tremor. You start to have eye twitches. You start to have Parkinson's-like symptoms if it gets too bad. That's that hunched posture, that shaking, that slow movement, that and that rigidity. We call it bradykinesia, slow movement, and postural, like this rigidity and postural instability. All these things are due to that state, and you're literally physiologically moving into that state. And you think of a Parkinson's person walking, they're walking with that gait. So that's the classic, but also windy individuals can have, like I had earlier in my med school experience, problems falling asleep, problems with anxiety, problems with ADHD, start having problems with focusing. Their mind is spinning so many directions. They can't hold it in and consolidate their information. There's too many things going on at the same time. Windy individuals are prone to seizures because of movement, excess movement. The body is moving too much, right? Pain. Chronic pain, wind imbalance, tension headaches, migraines, windy, pushing the wind. And then migraine is truly wind on fire, which is the fiery state. Fire is too much of that fire and water where you're hot-headed. Windy, I think of air-headed. Fiery, I think of hot-headed. Fiery individuals are so intense. When you get fiery, I know this because I am one that goes into this state. Sharp. My words are sharp. My language is sharp. I have to, I must, I need to. The windy says, what if thing? What if this happens? What if? The fire says, I have to, I must. Very demanding, very perfectionistic. Fires want to get things done so quickly, want so many things to happen. As a fire person that goes into fire state, I would go out of town and I'd bring so many different things to do, so many projects to work on. When I'm on the plane, I'll get this book read. When I get there, I'll work on this. Then I'll finish this task. And I had so many things. And yes, I ran a clinic for 20 years and I did really well with running the clinic because of that fire energy. It served me well. But too much fire, you start to get short-tempered. You start to get nausea and reflux. You start to get diarrhea. The gut and the brain are connected. The mind and the gut are connected. Emotions and the physical are one in Ayurveda. And you start to get fight, flight, or freeze. You go into fight state. And then the earthy is the third one. That's more earth and water element. Think of too much earth. You start to feel sluggish and depressed. You start to get heavy. You start to feel anhedonic. You don't want to do things you previously enjoyed doing. Your body starts to gain weight. You start to get more visceral fat, right? And you start to just feel that you have a hard time getting things done. You start to procrastinate because the mind is heavy. you start to get too attached to things, too attached to people, too attached to TV, too attached to foods. You get really kind of, it's that bind, hold on and bind. You bind things and hold on to things too much. You hold on to past grievances. You can't let go if you're the earthy type. So the beauty of all three is that 3 types stress personalities are reversible. You're never stuck in a point where you can't move out of state. The earth tends to crave, by the way, heavy, really chewy, like think of gluten, think of cheesy, heavy foods. The earth loves that. The fires love spicy foods. They love spice. So you start to crave these things. And unfortunately, what happens is when you move into state, you think that food is balancing you, and it's actually what you're craving, which is leading to further imbalance. So, like I said, I have the quiz on the website that people can take to figure out their type. Yeah, in the end of the day, when you have a certain type that you move into, that type typically is what leads to disease. And you want to figure out what is that nature and then go into deeper. The program, what is a program that got me there? Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Total sense. And I was seeing a few character traits of myself and some other people that I know when you were describing those. So I'm definitely going to re-listen to that part because it was very interesting. And what was cool that you said that you don't have to stay in those because you were born in, it's just a matter of trying to find balance. So that knowledge is very powerful.
Yeah, it's nice. We can all own maybe that we have a certain state and imbalance. I think it's important to take ownership over that. Yet the beauty is that the body is such and the mind is such that as long as we give it some attention, as long as you just even figure out your type, you're starting to be aware, you're starting to wake yourself up to the reality. And that itself is healing, that itself is healing to know that I go into that state.
Absolutely. So why do some stressed people spin into anxiety and overthinking, others into control and anger, others into heaviness, withdrawal, stagnation? What is actually happening underneath those different expressions?
Yeah. So what's really happening is the nervous system. Let's get into some neuroanatomy here. We have the prefrontal cortex. We've got the limbic brain, the temporal lobes, the limbic brain, the amygdala that stores your emotions. And then you've got the reptilian brain, the medulla and the deeper pons, the deeper brain. So the 3 parts of the brain, the prefrontal, the limbic, which is the feeling brain, and the reptilian brain, we'll say. The beauty is that as humans, we have this beautiful prefrontal cortex to organize our thinking, to help us see things in a way that truly should move us past challenges. Because as humans, we can really look at a situation and observe it for what it is and use that intellectual, prefrontal cortex to move us into a better space. Well, the biggest challenge is, even though we have the prefrontal cortex, we tend to become limbic and reptilian dominant. We tend to get that prefrontal cortex hijacked by the limbic, the emotions, and by our very reptilian, which is survival brain. I mentioned earlier how I, came into the world in a survival mentality. Idi Amin was the dictator at the time. It was a very, very traumatic time before I left Africa. 3 months before we left, there was a lot of violence. There's a lot of things that my family was going through. My dad was put in jail. And a lot of energy was there. And when I was smuggled out of the country, brought to the US, that energy moved me already into a state of survival. So my reptilian brain was a little bit more reactive than it should have been. I was a little bit too on looking for danger when danger didn't exist. So this is where in the book I talk about storytelling. And I think it's important to kind of understand that the stories we tell of the world aren't necessarily the truth. The stories are told based on the program that we have. And we're all exposed to 2 billion pieces of information every second. And we only take in 126 bytes of that. And so if you can't really take in everything, you've got to choose what to take in. And if you take in only a small portion of all of that information that's coming in, then the challenge is what I take in is based on my model of the world and based on my upbringing. So I may see danger where you don't see danger because your upbringing is different than mine. And the challenge with me seeing danger in a situation and maybe seeing danger too often is that my nervous system, my reptilian brain, is too reactive and puts me into state. So I may go into freeze state. I may start talking faster and moving faster and becoming more vata. And you will stay in a balanced state with the same external event. We may watch the same program. We may watch the same show on TV. We may see the same thing happen in front of us. We might be out and about and notice something. And I may notice something a little bit more than you do. And I get a little reactive about it and you don't, right? We're actually, interesting thing. We were in, I was just telling you I was in Portugal and Spain, and there was a protest. And this whole group was walking down the street with this protest. And I was actually paying attention to some people that were kind of in the protest that weren't so animated. They were kind of chanting and saying something. And another person I was with was kind of paying attention to a few different people in the crowd that were a little bit more animated. And she said, "Oh God, I feel like this is going to get bad." And I said, "No, they're just out there protesting." Because I was paying attention to a different portion of the protest. And it's funny, it was the same scene. I didn't see danger and she did. So what happens is when we go into state and I turn on that reptilian brain too often, I go into anxiety. You mentioned anxiety, worrying, and fear. I go into that quickly because of my nervous system. And why do I choose anxiety and fear? That's because maybe I grew up in an environment where fear was something and anxiety was something that was presented to me. There was a lot of worrying. Maybe there's a lot of rumination. And that's what I picked up. Maybe my generations past were anxious people. And I picked that up. And maybe I was born at a certain time of the year where it was more of a vata time of the year and I carried more wind energy. Maybe I had a traumatic delivery. Maybe my mom delivered me in a traumatic fashion. I carried more wind energy. There's lots of things that can put me into that why worrying state versus the fire state or the earth state. And so it's the energetics that have been inherited to us. It's our birth environment. It's our early childhood environment. I wish it was easy to say how and why, but we all go into one of these three. But that's why it happens. It's the nervous system is being hijacked unfortunately, by the amygdala and the fear-based brain and the reptilian brain.
Okay. So for the listener trying to identify themselves honestly, what are the signs that what they call just how I am is actually a long-standing stress state?
Interesting question. So yeah, it's just my personality. Maybe this is my natural personality. And so I think I would ask the question, is this personality serving you? Is this personality serving you? And if the personality is serving you in a way that's harmonious with your physical and emotional health, because some may say, well, it's serving me because, hey, I'm doing well in my job, I'm doing well with, my goals. Yet, are you, back to the question about health, are you feeling health in your physical and your emotional body? If you are in a personality where you occasionally, get a little worried about something, a little anxious, and you sleep well, you have good elimination, you have a healthy relationships with those around you, you have a nice circle of friends, a little bit of that isn't affecting you and your system is in a balanced state. If you express a little anger once in a while, you get a little depressed and low once in a while, yet you journal, you write, what the experience meant to you, you go and start listening to some music and you cook some food and you feel better and your overall system is in a healthy space, yeah, it's absolutely fine to have, we're human. We're supposed to have emotions and we are allowed. In fact, I would encourage us to process and feel emotions. It's when the emotions override and when the system gets so stuck that you start to generate challenges with sleep and with headaches and with pain and with digestion. That's the signal that your system is moving out of alignment. And that's for you to assess yourself because those subtle things, they're kind of subtle. Your physician's not going to ask those questions oftentimes. I did when in my clinical practice. I had a systems questionnaire, which was like this big, very, very long questionnaire asking about all these subtle symptoms. Do you eliminate first thing in the morning every day? Is the elimination like a soft banana? Like I asked every single question, right? Are you sleeping and falling asleep within 5 to 10 minutes when you lay it down? Like I asked all these questions. Not every physician's going to ask these questions. So it's for you to ask yourself and for you to, back to what we said earlier, not to say, oh, everyone has problems falling asleep. That's normal. No, it's not. I'm going to tell you it's not. And so if you can start to just kind of get a little bit of an internal dialogue going with yourself. Does your neck feel open? Are you having neck tightness? Are you having any subtle back tightness or pain? one of the reasons I love practicing yoga, and I am a certified yoga instructor, I do hatha-based yoga, is because it does get you into your physical body, right? When we slow down, we slow down, and we spend time in our bodies. You know, you go into like a pigeon pose and you just hold it and you hold it and you hold it, you know, it's that yin yoga type practice or the breath-based yoga. You slow it all down. You start to say, wow, you know, ooh, my neck, ooh, my right hip. Oh, there's a little bit of tension and tightness in there. That's your body telling you. And quite frankly, I know very few people that can go through a 1-hour class and say they didn't feel any part of their body was holding tension, you know? If not, I'd say, what, were you really, really paying attention? Because yeah, if you breathe and take your time and you get into your physical body, you'll notice that you're carrying it. And that's where our emotions are stored. They're stored in our physical body. And they're there to let us know, you know? The challenge is if you push past it, and I've had a lot of people who do, you know, and I'm not against hot yoga. I just will say, be careful when you're doing hot yoga and you walk in and you're so limber and you're getting into these poses. And remember, you're using something artificial to become flexible. I'd like to have people generate their own body heat. I'd like them to pay close attention to their own natural rise body temperature during the poses and pay really close attention to how flexible they are without the added benefit of that external tool of temperature. And then you start to get to know yourself and say, ooh, I tend to, you know, always have tightness on my right side of my body. And in Eastern medicine, right side of the body is linked to fire state, too much heat. Left side of the body, someone that has a left-sided bunion here, is linked to too much wind energy. And that's why I have my left-sided bunion. Too much movement activity. You know, I had a pager. I did finish medical school and residency because my sleep issues resolved in a month. So I stayed with it. And I was chief resident my last year. An honor to be chief resident, but a lot of work. And I was pregnant at that time with my first child. And I had a pager that was 24/7, constantly beeping. 3 months out of the year for this hospital, that was a good 45 minutes from my house. I get called in. So Vata and wind energy picked up because I couldn't have a normal schedule that year. I was constantly on. So wind went to my left side of my body. So I started noticing, gosh, my left hip is really tight. And, you know, I have a little more discomfort on this side. So if that helps, that's how we can start to really understand it and start to understand these 3 types. Our body is our messenger, and be loving towards your system. Be grateful your system is communicating with you. It's the tough love messenger. It's the only messenger sometimes that you'll ever have. Because oftentimes, if you ignore, what happens? The volume just goes up, doesn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. So guys, we're going to take a very short break here to say, if this episode is already putting words to patterns you have lived for years, hit that like button, subscribe to the Conscious Man 7 podcast, and share this with one person in your life who looks functional on the outside, but is clearly carrying too much on the inside. And in the comments, tell us which pattern hits you hardest, windy, fiery, or earthy. And follow us on Instagram at Adriano_246, at the Conscious Man 7 podcast, or Todd Cave on Facebook to see what we get up during the week, to see how I merge fitness, consciousness, and spirituality. And I also help people to get into the best shape of their lives, but also level up in other areas of their life. Don't forget to check out our sponsor of the show, The Kimbo, at thekimbo.com, to get yourself some orgonite pyramids, tower busters, and jewelry, which create orgone energy, which is the life source energy and neutralizes those nasty EMF waves that are constantly bombarding us with. Use coupon code CM7 to get 10% off your order. Now back to Trupti. So let's dive into gut, brain, body, and the hidden machinery of stress. Now, you teach that stress is not just a thought problem. It shows up in digestion, hormones, sleep, inflammation, headaches, and energy. Why is the body so often speaking long before the mind catches up?
Yeah. Why did you say is the body speaking so long before the mind catches up? Yeah. You know, I think truly speaking, our system is always trying to protect us from danger. And when the microbiome, the gut, so I have this we call it the 3 brain model. The first brain is the central nervous system, how we think. The second brain is the enteric nervous system, how we feel. The third brain is a microbiome. It's 100 trillion bacteria in the gut. When those bacteria start to become imbalanced, you start to get, we call it dysbiosis and pathogenic bacteria growing. The system is going to do its best to protect us from that danger signal of gut imbalance. The adrenals will turn on, you'll make more cortisol, you might have a little bit more pro-inflammatory cytokine release, peptide release at the gut level. Yet, because it's early and because it's starting to develop, most individuals, about 70%, don't even know they have gut intolerances and gut imbalances until many years later. Because I do believe that our system is allowing us to, if possible, recalibrate itself. So we as humans are supposed to notice, oh, I skipped a bowel movement, or I noticed that today the bowel movement was a little different, or I'm noticing that I'm a little bit feeling uneasy after I ate and getting bloating or having some gas. We're supposed to be intuitive enough, if we're paying attention to our physical bodies, to change our diet, change our habits, change our lifestyle. So we're given this opportunity to make these changes. And very often, that's supposed to happen first. And then, if those changes don't happen, we start to then get more of a physiological symptomatology and start to get the mind. And I do believe that at some level, if we're tuned in enough, we might pick up on that low-level anxiety, that low-level anger, that low-level depression. And again, we just push it off like that's normal, right? So, because all of us are wondering, what is the most balanced state for me? Like, we don't have this God-given, way of knowing that I'm at optimal right now. If we could measure that, like I'm wearing this Aura ring, if my Aura ring could say, you are 100% today, every part of you is perfect. The way you think, the way you feel, the way you digest, right? Wouldn't that be great? But we don't. We've got to get up in the morning and say, where am I today? Am I at 10 out of 10? Am I at 9? Am I 7? Am I 2? Where am I? And that perception, again, is clouded because it's based on our reality of what we should be. And within that, there's complexities because, I don't know, maybe my mom always complained of having a headache. And so again, I woke up with a little tension in my neck, but I don't have a headache, so I'm great, So we don't always gauge ourselves. And so I may be feeling a little worried and fearful, but maybe that was the norm in my household. So to me, that's normal. So what is normal, right? What is that optimal state? And so I think for all of us, when you start to get more intuitive, and for me, I really do believe yoga does this for me. When I take the time to do slow breath-based yoga, or it could be Tai Chi, it could be walking in nature, it could be grounding, it could be anything. Whatever tools you use to get into your bliss. We call it the kosha, the Anandamaya kosha, the bliss state, that deepest part of us that's blissful. We tend to know what that feels like because we've been there. Many of us have felt that, right? Yet, how many of us can stay there throughout the entire day? And how many of us are so connected with ourselves that we know we're staying there throughout the entire day? Because I know that, I may feel it for a few moments after Shavasana, after my yoga, yet then I go into my work mode. I'm on the computer, I'm answering emails, I'm getting on phone calls. I'm not necessarily paying attention to myself. And very quickly, I'm sure I'm moving into one of these states. And for me, I tend to go into windy very easily. And then wind can blow on the fire and I can get irritable. And then I know, oh, wait, have I eaten? Have I drank water? I'm pushing. Did I have that coffee? Maybe I shouldn't have had the coffee because it got me a little excitable. So, I think there is that generosity of the system to hide symptoms a little bit, hide our gut imbalances, hide our mind imbalances. Yet I think if we get intuitive, I can tell you back to why I think I don't have that many, at this point, no symptoms of perimenopause, even though I'm perimenopausal in my mid-50s, is because I'm really mindful of myself. I'm very mindful. If I'm out, I was at a dinner party, and if I'm at a dinner party and they're not serving food exactly on time, and my gut starts screaming at 6:30 p.m., I need to eat at 12 o'clock, same time. And if I'm not getting that food, I'm not a pleasant person to be around. I start to get irritable. I start to notice that I'm like, I'm not feeling good. And, at this event I was at, They didn't serve dinner until much later. I felt horrible the next day, to be honest with you. I woke up feeling really off the next morning. Even though I slept well that night. I just was like, oh, I tried to exercise in the morning and I was like, I'm just feeling my neck is so much more tight. And because I ate so late and my gut was saying, eat now, eat now. But I encourage everyone to follow their signals. Their hypothalamus is always sending you messages, the circadian pacemaker, through the body temperature, through the gut, through, your need to get up and pee. Like how many people don't get up and use a bathroom, because they're just too busy. They're too on. And it's an important thing that we want to take care of our urges and our needs. And if we don't, we're suppressing ourselves. And that leads to shutting down of the system and disconnect with the hypothalamus to the adrenals. And that's where we start to get hormonal challenges and adrenal challenges. So I digress, but those are all the things you want to kind of think about. And I even forgot what your original question was, but I want to bring all that up because it's so important to kind of think about your system as a whole and be kind and gentle, right?
Yeah. So to follow on that, your three brain model is one of your unique bridges between ancient wisdom and modern science. Can you unpack the thinking brain, the feeling brain, and the doing brain and explain why so many people are trying to solve a whole system issue with thought alone?
Yeah. And this came to me because I closed my clinic right after the pandemic in 2021. And the clinic was operating about a good 15 years. And I moved into the coaching world and I said, okay, I wasn't really prescribing that much anymore. And I was mainly doing coaching anyways. And I got certified as a coach. And I said, I'm kind of more of a coach than I'm a physician. So let's take that hat off and focus on coaching. And I looked back and I said, who were my most successful patients? What were they doing? And I realized that they were balancing all three of these brains. And in neurology, we focus on the brain that's in the head, the central nervous system, and the spinal cord. We focus the attention there. And especially when I was doing migraine work, a lot of it was quieting down the brain and the head, quiet that down, give medications to quiet down that brain. And the reality is I started to see that, wow, those patients that did really well, they were balancing this more complex nervous system, which I'll call the three brains. The first brain is the central nervous system. And I look at that as the thoughts, like you were mentioning, how we think, how we view the world, our way of managing and receiving information, and how we create a story, based on the external events. And for some of us, we've got a great program there. We see things in a very healthy way, And for others, because of early childhood experiences and trauma, the model that they have is misaligned and it's creating imbalances in their perception, which then, as I mentioned earlier, can put you into a state that isn't quite balanced. So I was noticing that those that were doing well in my practice were kind of managing their first brain, their thought patterns. They were kind of knowing that their storytelling maybe wasn't serving them and changing their language patterns, changing that I have to I'm doing the best I can at this moment in time, changing their rumination to, oh no, what if this medication doesn't work for me, to, you know what? I have trust in you. I have faith in you. This should work. I was giving them books to read. I was giving them, back in the time, Louise Hay, you can heal yourself. And I was giving them Eckhart Tolle, New Earth to read. And I was giving them different things to read. And I think those beautiful thinkers, Wayne Dyer, God bless, all these beautiful thinkers were helping them change their thinking patterns. And they were taking the time to change those programmed thoughts. It takes work, can be done. They were also, most importantly of the three brains, working on their second brain. And this is the brain, back to the doctor's office, what gets missed is the second brain. And that is the enteric nervous system, the nervous system that's within the gut. 200 to 600 million neurons are within the gut. We make all of our neurotransmitters in the gut. Serotonin production, 90% of it is in the gut. We feel first, and then we think. For anyone that's walked into a room and kind of created an impression of the room and the dynamics and the people, they feel first. The amygdala, we have two of them, one on each side of the brain, are picking up at a subconscious level and creating a sense and connecting with the feeling brain. And then we think a thought and we make cortisol if we want to, based on if we think there's any acute stressor. We feel and then we think. So the enteric nervous system is what holds your intuition, holds your emotions. it is the sensing part of us that, unfortunately, based on that book, remember I talked about, Bernie Siegel, defensive repressors, a lot of individuals don't feel their emotions. They don't allow themselves to feel. And this is where slowing ourselves down, connecting with nature, connecting with people, live people, not over social media. And, I love connecting this way, but it's so great to be with people in person, right? And I feel like there's such a sadness I have to so many of the young people, my kids, especially my daughter, her first job was all virtual. And then she's like, Mom, I can't do this. And then she went from this quite cush job, and she was getting paid pretty well, to be honest with you. She changed to a job where it's 5 days in person, dinner's included. She's with people. And she's like, Mom, I kind of wish they gave me Thursdays or even Fridays off, maybe a half a day even. So I said, well, you asked for it. You get what you asked for. And she's loving the fact that she's around people. She does wish she has a few hours to take care of more things when she's used to being completely free to do all of her errands. And she's like, wow, this is something. I said, yeah, welcome to the world we lived in with being in person full day. But she's getting that connection with people. She's around people all the time. And that exchange, that connection with our hearts, with our emotions, with telling your stories. God, I had a tough night. Oh gosh, my family member, this is what happened. We call that the water cooler conversation. That is important to have, right? And so we're missing a lot of that. And when trauma happens, how many people really fully process those traumatic experiences and have people to talk to about those traumas that they can trust, that are safe, So the second brain, I feel like that's a piece when you look at why disease happens. Very often it's unprocessed, repressed emotions. And sometimes they're suppressed, which is a conscious thing, or they're repressed, which is unconscious. And it depends on the individual if they're doing both or one or two. And then the third brain, when we finally get there, that's the microbiome. And back to these early patients, they were working on all three of these. They were becoming more emotionally vulnerable. They were working on their thoughts, and they're working on their digestion, changing their foods, eating in a healthy manner, being mindful of their meal times. They did all three. They worked on all three brains. And wow, they got released from their chronic conditions because they're finally aligning. And they're using the template of, am I the windy, fiery, earthy? And the next part is, where am I holding most of this energy? Is it my thoughts? Is it my emotions? Is it my diet? Maybe it was all three. And it's hard to do all of it. Let's start somewhere. Maybe we start with the diet, right? Let's start with the diet. Let's then move into the other things. But if we can move into all three, that's really where the magic happens, honestly. And I saw some incredible outcomes, like incredible. So I know it works. it takes some time to wrap yourself around this model,
What you're saying reminds me a lot of the model that I talk about, which is the mind, body, spirit. And I often say that we are a mind, body, spirit complex. And I have found that my clients that have gotten the best results have always been the ones that have worked on all three parts of themselves. And you call it earth, wind, fire. I call it mind, body, spirit. But in reality, it's basically the same thing, because fitness is actually very easy to do, but the mental state is the most important thing, because mindset is, I'm going to go to bed on time, I'm going to follow my meal plan, and I'm not going to eat Cheetos, puka pies, and Doritos, right? Right. And then what happens is that through that process of improving your mindset and getting into physical shape, you start to realize more the spirit inside of you, because the spirit is always there, but it becomes more visible, more felt. You start to see things, hear things, feel things. But that hearing, seeing, and feeling doesn't come in a body that is unbalanced and a mind that is constantly racing. So this is why I say all the time that getting into shape will level up all areas of your life if you actually look at the other things around you, which are your mind, how you're feeling, your thoughts, your beliefs, your fears, traumas, and then the spiritual aspect too. So it's kind of cool to hear you describe all of those things, which pretty much echoes everything that I do in my coaching and in my fitness programs and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So,
it's the key.
absolutely. So you've spoken publicly about the gut-brain link in migraine, and more broadly, how often do you see people trying to heal their mood, stress, or mind while ignoring the state of their gut and microbiome?
Yeah. And I call it the top down, bottom up approach. You try to work on one aspect, just your mind, and don't take into the food and gut balancing. You're not going to get very far. And vice versa. If you're just going to work on your gut and nutrition, not your mind, you're not going to get very far. It's top down, bottom up. And let's not forget those emotions that are right there in the middle. So I have had, and the beauty of being in practice for so long is that I've had patients bring in, bags of supplements saying, hey, this doctor I saw told me to remove all these foods and take these supplements, but how come I'm still getting chronic migraines? They weren't working on their mind. Or I've had patients say, I've been meditating, doing yoga all these years, yet how come I'm still having these chronic migraines? How about your gut? And it's important to think about all of that, because the reality is that only one aspect is only going to take you to a certain level. And if I sit and meditate every morning, and I'm a big believer of meditation. Every morning, I'm a big believer, 5 minutes a day if you can do it. Little breath, little meditation, a little bit of movement, right? If you can't get a lot in, just even a few minutes, right? If you start your day with a little meditation and you, let's say, practice that, and you're really beautiful at your meditation practice, yet you don't pay any attention to the foods you're bringing in or to the way you're eating or how you're eating. And, you're eating in the car, you're running around eating fast food and you're doing all that, but you're meditating. That's not going to take you very far. And vice versa. If I'm going to be very mindful about my meals and yet my mind is spinning and I'm anxious and I'm angry and I'm frustrated about something, that food isn't going to be processed well, because the mind is going to create a gut state. As I mentioned, if I'm anxious, my gut goes into spasm. I'm going to get constipated. I'm not going to be able to break down my foods, right? If I'm angry and irritable, I'm going to start to make excessive hydrochloric acid and stomach acid and feel reflux and get nausea. That's not going to, my gut is going to go into this gastroparetic slow state, and it's not going to break down my foods well. So the mind is very much going to influence the physiology of the gut. And the foods you eat, yeah, I have patients that say, I really have been dedicated to a clean diet, checked my food intolerances. I am so beautiful with my diet. I remember there was one patient, just remembered, she did her food intolerance testing probably around when my daughter did, which was a good, 20 years ago. And she found that there were like these 4 key foods at that time that she was intolerant to. So she changed and took those foods out of her diet. And I remember she was a therapist of all things, right? And this is an interesting story. And she was very strict about not eating those 4 foods. And she moved to 4 other main ingredients, or a few other ingredients to kind of replace those. And what happened? She became intolerant to the next items on the list, right? And then she took those away. Now she's got 8 things she can't eat. And then she found another group of foods that she started eating that she could tolerate. And then, did her testing, and now she's got all these intolerances. What was happening? By the time I saw her, she had so many intolerances. She could only eat about 5 different food items, because most vegetables she had reactions to, most grains she had reactions to, most meats she had reactions to. And she's like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I have all these challenges. I've been so strict with my diet. I don't know. And I could feel her energy, quite frankly, because we're energetic people. I could pick up on her, energy. High pitta energy. Very intense. Very, very, very critical too. Very tough. Like with the front desk staff, I remember walking in. I was 5 minutes late. I'm sorry, my friends, but when I run an integrative clinic, you take your time with your patients. You're going to take an hour and 10 minutes if needed. So I was 5 minutes late. I wasn't very late, and she was upset with the team that I was 5 minutes late. And I remember all this energy coming in. And I just kind of said to her in a very gentle way, because remember, she's a therapist, right? And I said, I'd just love to know how much time you've spent working on your thoughts and your mind. And I remember her getting really angry and saying, what does my mind have to do with this? And I said, a whole lot of things. It has so much to do with this. Your mind is a key component to your digestive health. And she was so upset that that was the direction I was going. She actually didn't make a follow-up visit with me, And it took her about 2-3 months, and she came back and saw me again out of desperation, And she's okay, let's talk about this some more. What does the mind have to do with my gut? I have been nothing but perfect with my diet. She's a perfectionist, so she used the word perfect. And I said, I absolutely appreciate that. And you have. And I'm going to give you a lot of just, gosh, positive feedback on how much you've done with your diet. You've done such a great job with your diet. And I applaud you on that. Yet the next piece of this is going to be, how can we encompass and incorporate the way we think about ourselves, the world, and even food? How can we view food? Because she started viewing food as a villain. She started saying food it's working against me. She started getting angry at her meals and angry at her food. And I said, you've had so much anger. You're wrapping into all of this. There's no way your body's going to heal with all of that anger. Will you be open to working on that with me? And she said, yeah, teach me some things. And I gave her some techniques and some things to start doing. I gave her some herbals to work on her mind. I have specific herbals I use for that hot-headed, angry mind, And honestly, within a month, she started feeling better. And she's like, all right, let's go. And so it's kind of humbling, because a lot of people, back in the day, now we're so much more open to talking about emotions and stress and the mind. Yet, 10, 20 years ago, it was very much reductionistic. Fix that part of you. And even in the functional medicine communities, it was like, take these supplements, fix your diet. Only now, even in the functional medicine community, is there now an understanding of the importance of your spiritual well-being, your emotional well-being, and mindset as a piece of health, right? So we're at a good time now. People are now more able to appreciate the importance of all these aspects to ourselves that will create healing.
Absolutely. We've come a very long way, because it is, very well documented that mental state affects health, affects your diet, how you you look, is clear mind-body connection. And it is just a travesty that, we are still just looking at the body itself, or just the mind, and not realizing the interconnectedness between them, So,
Right.
There is a proactive idea underneath your work. Some people are not failing because they lack discipline. They're dysregulated. How much suffering gets mislabeled as laziness, weakness, or lack of willpower, when the real issue is nervous system imbalance?
I think most of it's a nervous system imbalance. And I really find that for most individuals, they're actually trying harder. They're working so hard to be healthy. Like even the example of this patient, she was working so hard. She put so much time into her diet and meal planning and shopping habits and supplement taking. She was so compliant, And so many individuals you've probably seen even exercise so intensely. They work so hard. And yet the reality is, you have to take the time to get to know, is your nervous system, your hypothalamic pituitary axis in alignment? And if it's not, if it's dysregulated, if it's disconnected, which I think for most people it is, honestly, been doing this a long time. I've been practiced, 20 some years and ran my own clinic for 15. Pretty much everyone I meet has some, even myself included, has some nervous system dysregulation, because it is really challenging. And to me, that's another way of even saying that we carry a little bit of stress, right? Our body and our mind and our nervous system, it's very hard in this world that we live in to be completely balanced at all times, because we're in a society where even if you're around somebody that is excitable, I mentioned even going out to eat at that dinner, you're going to pick up because of the lifestyle you're living, because of the people you're around. You can sit on the train next to someone that's carrying extra energy. It's very hard to completely shield yourself and be completely regulated at all times. Some are far more imbalanced than others, but all of us at some level carry some nervous system imbalance. And the beauty is that as long as we can tap into that and understand what is it that activates us, we can start to reprogram ourselves and shift ourselves back. It takes dedication, but it just is a decision that you make, that I'm going to work on this. Overthinking it, over analyzing it isn't the way to go. It's just to say, okay, I'm having the symptoms. Let's go. What do I need to do? What is the exercise routine I need to follow? What is the sleep pattern I need to be on? What is the food I need to eat? What is it that I should do to get myself into a balanced state? And honestly, it's as simple as making that decision that you're going to do that. Because once you have the knowledge and the wisdom, my request of everyone is to take action. It's not to sit and learn and to read more books and to listen to more podcasts. It's to say, what is the next step I'm going to make to move into that balanced state? Because quite frankly, if you're having symptoms, there is an imbalance and there is a dysregulation. And the hypothalamus wants nothing more than your body to be in harmony. It wants our circadian pacemaker. It wants our system to be in alignment with the sun and the moon and the daylight patterns. But we, unfortunately, push ourselves and don't honor the signaling. So I think we have enough literature and knowledge and wisdom. It's simply taking the action to reset ourselves is what we all should be doing more of, and not wasting our time. Honestly, a lot of people waste their time with things that don't serve them, being on social media, watching Netflix, doing things, being around people that don't serve them. Start having some boundaries and saying no, and start taking care of yourself and take yourself seriously, because the healthcare system, if you just rely on that, it's going to disappoint you. It's disappointed me. I'm in the healthcare system. We've got to take care of ourselves, you know.
I couldn't agree more. The healthcare system will fail you 100%. And, you know, I think the pandemic showed us that in spades. So in the Stress RX, you have made it clear that trauma is far more pervasive than most people think. What changed your mind from seeing trauma as only extreme events to seeing how widely it shapes ordinary lives?
So for me, I think a lot of it was based on those patients I was seeing over the years and realizing I was looking at what I call the big T's, the big traumas, like divorce and loss of life and abuse, that those are the things that were going to create an impact on the nervous system, dysregulate that hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and create, the disease that I was seeing. It was only those big traumas that would generate that kind of a pattern. And then the more I saw, the more patients I saw, the more I even evaluated myself, I realized, wow, there's a lot of what we call the smaller T's, the little T's, those situations that happen, maybe the bad breakup, maybe the situation when you were a young child and you were on the playground and the friend didn't invite you into their group of friends to play on the swing set. And that happened a few times over. Maybe, your parents didn't pick you up on time from school and they were always running 20, 30 minutes late and you felt abandoned. There's a lot of smaller traumas that impact the nervous system that shift our system into a state of that reptilian stress. As I was mentioning, we go into that stress state more readily because of those situations, and eventually can lead us down the road to disease. And as I start to talk to more patients and hear about their stories and work with them on a deeper level, I realized there's a lot more trauma here than I was ever believed to, or even told to believe. And in fact, quite frankly, in my training, we didn't talk about trauma at all. It wasn't something that was brought up in medical school or residency. We didn't discuss trauma at all. And it was only something when I did further research and learning and did my, advanced training on my own, that I realized trauma is quite pervasive and it's quite common. And we shouldn't be so shy to say that we've experienced trauma. It's okay. And it shouldn't be something that's shameful. It should be something that we should talk about and say, okay, hey, that experience, no matter how small you think it was traumatizing for you. And quite frankly, we shouldn't judge someone for what they believe was traumatic for them, because, for them, that was traumatic and it impacted their nervous system in a way that it created a shift in their being. And so I look at trauma as if your nervous system has shifted and you've gone from, let's say, I was born in that Vata personality and I started to get kind of windy because, maybe I had that early abandonment story. And I'm now getting more nervous about people abandoning me. I'm maybe more clingy to my friends and someone shows up late and I get upset with them. Well, then that early story and that early trauma changed my program. And because it shifted me, it shifted my nervous system, that was a traumatic event for me. And I own that. I will now try to find solutions to reduce that Yet the more we can own our traumas, the more we can then repair and reset ourselves and live life in more authenticity. And back to what you said earlier, the more you're in that more authentic balance to you, the more you connect with your soul and your spiritual self, and you feel more of that sense of contentment, peace, and happiness, which is what we all want, don't we? You know?
Absolutely. So you write that trauma can lodge itself in neurology and subconscious programming, and that the subtle body remembers what the conscious mind may not. How should that change the way we think about people who say, nothing bad happened to me, so why did I react like this?
That's exactly made for them, right? That nothing bad happened to me. And that might have even been me, honestly, because I think for years I was like, nothing bad happened to me. That was my mom that went through that. My mom smuggled me out of Africa. I was fine. I grew up in Chicago and I was fine. Yet I experienced the energetics of that trauma, And I think it's humbling to say to ourselves that we've been traumatized when we don't believe we have. Yet I'm just going to say, if anyone out there gets triggered, if you notice that you have a pattern of being, that you get triggered over certain things that happen, look at your patterns. I think it's really important. NLP is all about breaking patterns of habit. Do I go into that same relationship over and over? Do I attract the same kind of friends? Like, why am I always attracting the narcissist in my life? What am I doing to bring them in? And it's something that we do to attract them. And I want to just say that. We have to own that. We attract them into our lives. We should own our programs and say, what is it that I am doing to always have that same kind of situation happen over and over and over again? And then you start to break that down and say, oh, is there something that I'm missing in my being? Something that I haven't been, maybe because I've had that, go back to the abandonment story, I haven't felt that sense of love. I felt kind of neglected. Maybe I'm lacking that and I'm seeking someone that can give that to me and fill that void. And so I think the beauty of understanding and knowing and owning that this can happen at a subconscious level and without any memory. I mean, so many experiences happen before we remember them in our early years of life. I mentioned between 0 to 10, we're all in this kind of theta, delta, hypnotic brainwave pattern, and things happen to us and we absorb them as truth. So maybe I was 6, 7 years old and I don't remember this, but maybe I had individuals around me saying, oh, she doesn't fit here. She doesn't fit in because she's Indian. I'm not saying that happened, but maybe kids in the playground were saying that, and I was hearing that messaging all the time on the playground. I might have then, as I got older and worked into my career, started to realize and think to myself, oh, they're not including me because I'm Indian. And that has nothing to do with the people. It has to do with my own program. And so that trauma story, it's important to own that might have been a subconscious thing that happened that I don't remember. Yet I got triggered by that person not including me. And I'm kind of mad at that person for not including me, but maybe it's me. And maybe it's how I'm seeing and I'm telling a story to myself about the situation that isn't really the true story. So it's so important to identify that first and foremost, I'm here to tell you, yes, your subconscious program will carry neurologically a part. We call it these parts within us that hold on to energetics of experiences that weren't beneficial to us. And then if you get triggered or reactive of something, and if it's especially a program and you're having repetitive cycles of something that keep happening, you keep feeling that people aren't including you, you keep feeling you're getting left out. Maybe there's something to be said about your early life experience that's creating that for you. And hey, if you work on that early life experience, suddenly you release that, things will start happening for you. I've just seen it over and over for myself and others. You start to naturally get into a more abundant mindset and state. And you suddenly let go of that victim kind of mindset and feeling of being neglected and abandoned. And wow, there's a very loving world. A lot of people that include me and invite me. And I just wasn't seeing that. And it's a beautiful place to be, a much better place to be. So I encourage everyone to release it because only good things happen when you start to release.
Yes, it is really about taking accountability and also having introspection, which are two things that most humans on earth don't really do. It's almost like if they're allergic to it. But I'm hoping that with shows like mine and guests like you that are sharing this these concepts and these distinctions so well that people will be encouraged to actually, look a little bit on the inside and see what's going on in there and analyze your past and to heal your fears and traumas, because these are the things that pretty much determine our present and determine our future, So
Absolutely.
one of the boldest themes in your book is that protective patterns can harden into personality. What are some socially rewarded identities? Achiever, caretaker, perfectionist, the one who always holds it together, that may actually be trauma adaptations.
Mm-hmm. I believe all of those are part of our societal norm to success. Being a perfectionist, wow, I did that for years, It hardwired into me, which is when the therapist asked me if I was stressed, and I said no, because that was my personality. I was a perfectionist, but I didn't even know what that was at that time. Yet when you look at even like studies on adolescent headaches, you'll find that most of adolescents that have headaches, chronic headaches, are perfectionistic in their teens.
That's interesting.
It's an early program, yeah. So what we find is that all of those personalities, most commonly what we see is perfectionism, pleasing, right? Those are probably the two top, and then caretaking is interesting, another one that we see a lot. When you move into, and I think about even the book Quiet, where it discusses how many of us are more introspective and quieter than we're allowed to be, because we're socialized to believe that if we are outward and doing and giving and serving, we can do really well in our careers and our life, from a social status standpoint to career, right? And so we kind of become socialized to become a certain personality. So part of it is truly we enter that state because of almost a protection, because that's all we know to do is to move into that state to protect our system from danger, and our belief that we have to be in that state to just survive. And then we're being told, hey, the more you stay in that state, you know what? You're going to get some great rewards from it. You're going to get paid more. You'll get nominated and promoted. You'll get these great accolades. And all these wonderful things will happen if you stay in that state. So then consciously, we want to stay in the state because it serves us. That's pretty much most successful people, most of them that I know, that I've met, all walks of life, from celebrities to friends. I've met so many people that is their state. And they've admitted to me that that has gotten me to where I need to be. What do I do now? How do I, move from that state into a balanced state and not lose my accolades and my success and my respect? And I'm here to tell you, the beauty is that once you start to own that state you believe is what got you there, and you own that, quite frankly, it is more your abundant, blissful, harmonious, authentic state that's going to move you up the ladder faster. You start to own and realize that. I tell you, it's amazing the release that happens when you can let go of those personalities. I think we're fooled to believe that we have to be perfectionistic, we have to be pleasers, that we can't say no. And what I've learned by being a pleaser myself also is that the more we say no, the more respect we're earned, and the more we actually evolve, because we're taking care of ourselves and we can be more authentically present for those we serve, because we're strong in our boundaries. I remember I was working at a place where, I was consulting, and they had meetings at noon Chicago time. And I'm big on lunch. Lunch is your biggest meal of the day. And I sit down and have lunch. It's the most important meal, unless I'm traveling, right? And I remember they scheduled their meetings at noon because they're on the West Coast and it's 2 hours time difference. And I said, I'm not going to meet at noon with your team. And it was a team of a good number of people, 10, 20 people. And I remember the team, one of the leaders saying to me, so you're going to miss the meeting because of lunch? I said, yeah, I'll show up after lunch. I'm not going to eat and be on this call and do this at the same time. I'm going to chew my food and eat, and I'll join the call late. And there was a little bit of anger with that. Like, I can't believe you're choosing, this is the only time the whole group can get together and this and that. And I said, I know that you want me to be there during that time, but I've got to take care of my gut. It's the most important thing for me. And that's why I'm as healthy as I am right now. But it's those kinds of decisions, that boundary setting, that keeps me healthy in my 50s, right? And it's not easy to set boundaries. It's much easier to be a pleaser and say, fine, I'll just do it. And to believe that that's going to help me and succeed in that position. It worked completely against me. If anything, if I were to do that, it would have worked against me. The more that I stayed with my, my truth and my boundaries, the more actually I got respected. And I think for all of us, when it comes to feeling worthy and feeling valued and clearing our shame and getting confident, it's really holding strong to those boundaries and not going into one of those states. So I think it's important to know that even though we believe it's good to be a perfectionist and a pleaser and an achiever and a caretaker, it's only doing us more harm. And over the course of time, will deplete you, will deplete your entire system, your nutrients, your hormones, your well-being, your digestion, and you're going to be of no service to anybody. Right?
It
Completely wasted all that energy and have, right?
is true. I like to tell my clients and people that you need to look at yourself as like a bank account, or you can say a social bank account. And if you keep making withdrawals from the bank account and giving to other people, that's not that is bad. But there comes a point in time where the bank account goes into the red, and you can operate in the red because you have like an overdraft for so long. And then the overdraft runs out, and then what happens? You break down, you get ill, you could get serious disease or whatever just from not taking care of yourself, not feeding yourself food, and not honoring your truth and not honoring the things that will cause you stress because you're going to do. So I think it's quite important that you maintain your constitution. So I think that's pretty bold, but I agree with it as well, to stand up and say, no, I'm gonna have something to eat, because you know yourself, and you know that you would probably get irritable and sick and stuff like that. So you also talk about the stories we tell ourselves and what you call the model of the world. How often is the present moment not the real problem, but the old meaning system we keep projecting onto it?
I think most of the time, unless you've done some deep work, most of the time, the stories you're telling yourselves aren't really aligned with reality. And I'm saying that only because very few I have known have taken the time to understand how they think. As much as I've spent time investigating my mind, myself, training in NLP, studying my patients, studying how they all think. And most people I meet haven't taken the time, simply because they haven't been guided to do so. It's not something you're guided to start evaluating the way you storytell. And yet, when I speak to individuals, especially right now with so many people being so polarized, right? And believing their story is the story that I need to believe. And the reality is that it's a fascinating scenario that what we end up doing, because we have such limited ability to take in all the information presented to us, we have to whittle it down to a certain way of thinking. We have to, because there's no way we could process everything that's coming at us. And yet the challenge with that is that we're not taking the time to ask, why are we just taking it down to this core bit of information to create our reality? Maybe there's some other ways of viewing this. And I do believe the practices of breath work, I believe the practices of meditation and journaling, I believe the practices of even just being in nature and connecting with source will allow you to see things in a bigger picture. And of course, psychedelics, right? You start to see things from a different perspective. Yet most people I meet aren't spending enough time in that space. So there's a lot of stories that they're telling themselves that aren't harmonious for themselves. And I'm saying this because this is going to affect your health. If you're storytelling and storytelling and storytelling and getting angry and getting upset and getting so worked up about situations that are really beyond your control, unfortunately, it's going to affect your physiology. And there's no pill to fix that. The only thing to fix that is for you to take some time to understand, where is my thinking pattern imbalanced and why am I generating these patterns of thought? And what can I do to change that so that I can be more harmonious and be more at peace? Because what we need now is for everyone to be at peace. if we can internally generate that vibrational energy where we're in alignment with our core self, with our soul, and we can emanate that beautiful rhythm and flow and let others feel that, that energy from us, not only will we be balanced, we'll balance those around us, and we'll have a more balanced world to live in. So I think it's so important to start with just the stories you're telling yourself. What is that generating in terms of a program? And how can you shift yourself so then you can start to look at things in a bigger picture, maybe change some of those stories, be more open to other perspectives, and most importantly, balance out yourself and your own inner sense of peace. Because that internal battle is the toughest battle you'll ever fight. And if we can quiet down that battle within here, we can really improve everything out there.
I couldn't agree more, because I say to people all the time that we are storytellers, story creators, and most of the stories in our head are actually not real, and they're not based on any factual information, just what we think or we felt at the moment, but doesn't necessarily describe what was the reality of the situation,
Absolutely.
So let's get you out on this one. If unhealed stress can shape the body, distort identity, and quietly direct the course of a life, then what does real healing look like in your world? Not just symptom relief, but genuine alignment with someone who is meant to be.
Real healing is truly taking full observation, accountability, and understanding of why my system is speaking to me in the way that it is if I have symptoms. Owning that the system is only my messenger and I'm going to lean into it versus try to cover it up, band-aid it, block it with the pharmaceutical and ignore it. I'm going to lean in and taking the steps to direct myself by setting some boundaries, saying some no's, looking at my relationships. Are they supporting me? My career, is it supporting me? And getting truth into my purpose and my dharma. Am I living in alignment with my values and my dharma? And if I'm not living in alignment with my values, if I'm working in a place where I'm making a lot of money, but I'm doing it in an unethical way, or I'm surrounding myself with people that are a little bit too materialistic, and I like being around them because they look good and makes me look good, but that isn't really aligned with my value system, then that is not going to help me heal as a person. And so it's tough. It's tough. And every single day, I'm always thinking through these things about how can I choose more wisely? Who can I surround myself with? What activities should I say yes to? What food should I eat? Yet, the more you take the effort and do that, real healing is owning that when my physiology is imbalanced, I'm going to look at that as my system giving me guidance to realign, to self-correct, to shift. And then I'm going to start doing those things, shifting and correcting. And I think people around me know this because they know that I'm the one that if I'm at an event, I will leave at 10 p.m. if it's my bedtime and I'm tired. I will sit down and grab a plate and sit down in a corner by myself and eat if everyone else is standing and eating. Like I will take action. So it is those steps of taking action each and every day, But who's more important to take care of in this world but yourself and your own soul? I mean, is everyone else around you more important than you are? I often say, like, why is what everyone else thinks and does more important than what you honor yourself with? And I've gotten to a point where I just don't really care what other people think. And I'm going to take care of me. And that's the most important person to take care of right now. Because if I can be fully, like you were mentioning, filling that, receptacle, if I can fully fill my own bucket, then I can serve at the highest level. And then I'm much better for my kids and my family and my friends and those that I work with, right? Yet if I can't, then who am I for them? So, healing really is that empowerment of self and allowing yourself to own your imbalance, lean into it, take some action steps to fix it. And again, everyone here has enough wisdom and knowledge to take those steps. I'm just going to say, just we need to move in that direction. And the more we can shift ourselves, the more we can shift those around us. And that to me is the beauty, because the world needs it right now more than ever.
Very, very well said. And I couldn't agree more, because I always say that you can't give someone something that you don't already have. And if you want love, you need to be love. If you want to get respect from someone, you need to give respect first. You need to be in order to receive. And that also requires self-love. And self-love is exactly what you're saying. If you know that you want to eat at 6 o'clock and you are not going to get food till 8 o'clock, it means you just go somewhere, get a little bite to eat to hold you to maybe 8 o'clock and then eat again, right? Because you're honoring yourself, right? And that is what self-love is. And you have to have radical self-love. And this is why I say to people that, there's a saying, I can't remember which movie it was in Netflix, but the guy said, a lion does not care about the opinions of sheep. And, I tell people that you actually need to be a lion, because a lion doesn't care about the other animals in the jungle, right? In the Serengeti, he will go after what he wants. And we need to kind of have like the character of a lion, where we just don't care about the opinions of others, obviously within reason of not causing harm. But if this is for self-preservation and love purposes to protect yourself, yeah, you don't care about the opinions of others, because, this is about not, like you said, enforcing boundaries and, telling people that these are my red lines and saying that this is what's acceptable to me or not, right? So I think that when we have radical self-love, then it causes us to look radically on the inside. And then we can do a lot of the healing and the processing that this conversation we've had today has shown that we're just not doing. And there are a lot of imbalances that come from the mind, the body, the spirit, the gut. Everything is imbalanced. So, Dr. Trupti, with that being said, tell the lovely folks at the Conscious Man 7 where they can find you and what name of your books, and, if you're doing coaching, how they can get involved in that and all of that great stuff.
Yeah, thank you. So, I think the easiest way to find me is my website. So it's Trupti Gokani, TRUPTIGOKANIMD.com, TruptiGokaniMD.com. And that it'll open up to the stress quiz. And I encourage everyone, just if nothing else, just take the quiz. It's a free, quick quiz. Lean into your stress personality, learn a little bit about your nature. That alone would make me so happy, just to take that quiz and learn about yourself. And then to move further, I have a couple of books. The Mysterious Mind was written in 2015, Amazon bestseller, and then also The Stress RX, which also made Amazon bestseller in 3 categories, which I'm so excited about. And both of these books are really looking at Ayurveda and using ancient medicine in our more modern times. So first book, Mysterious Mind, a little bit more Ayurveda and migraine, with a chapter 2 on gut health, looking at food intolerances and adrenals. Really big, important topic in that book is how adrenal and adrenal imbalance appears. And then the second book goes into more, why do people, if they learn that they're the Vata and gets excitable, kind of windy type, why do they get stuck in that state? And second book goes into what we've talked about in a much deeper way, going into the stories we tell, going into the trauma, going into the different, parts of the brain, for example, the default mode network and why that network stays on and what you can do to rebalance it. And what I like about that book is it's very deep and heavy, but at the end of each chapter, there's a take-home points. And I always say, if nothing else, you just get those take-home points and you learn that. And there's some exercises at the end of each chapter. I think a lot of people can benefit and learn a lot without even working with me, by reading some of those books and learning about themselves. And if someone wants to go further, there is an apply now consultation tab. And I do take select clients. I'm a little bit full right now, but I have certain programs that I offer once or twice a year. And if it's the right fit, I'm more than happy to offer and say, hey, come into this program. You might be a great fit for the program. And I have a couple of different ways I organize them, looking at this 3-brain model and kind of support individuals like yourself that are really more focused on the fitness and the gut. I go more into the deeper, like Ayurvedic, spiritual, deeper mind, what our programs are, why we're stuck. And it's more of kind of mindset coaching, right? And looking at how we can change that and how we can, balance out ourselves using all the tools that we have, because we can always go deeper. And when people are ready, I'm so excited to work with them, because I think there is so much we can do to bring ourselves into harmony. And on that page, there's also podcasts and shows I've been on, which people can learn about and read and listen to more. So thank you for that.
So guys, all links to everything Trupti will be in the description of this podcast. So go over there, show some love, tell her the Conscious Man 7 sent you, and check out some of her work, get her books and all of that other great stuff. Guys, Dr. Trupti today shared very much information. She also said that you actually need to take care of your physical health, because your gut is a major issue in all of the issues that we have. So as you know, guys, I help spiritually inclined people burn fat and build muscle. So if you would like to start your fitness journey, get into the best shape of your life and level up in all other areas of your life, send me a message or, hit me up via email. But you can find me on Instagram at Adriano_246 or my name, Todd Cave. Send me a message, like I said, let's have a chat and see if you're a good fit for the Compound Body Training Army. If you are on a spiritual journey or you would like to start a spiritual journey and you would like some help removing some fears and traumas, I can help you to get some magic mushrooms. So again, hit me up on my socials at Adriano_246 or my name, Todd Cave, and let me help you to start your spiritual journey or to continue it. And if you would like to support this podcast, you can do that by visiting our merch store. We have some cool tank tops, hoodies, shirts, and sweats. Link to our Amazon store, Todd and Me, will be in the description of this podcast. And if you are listening to this podcast or one of the podcast platforms and you simply don't like ads, you can consider being a member of our Patreon or Locals community. You will get early access to all of our episodes. This episode will be put on Patreon and Locals first. And you also have direct access to me, because I get back to my messages on there more, because I get tons of emails and messages and I get saturated. So, you would get first dips on my time and stuff like that. So for a few bucks a month, you can become a member. You can help us out with video editing. And like I said, you can propose questions to me. Some people recommend guests to me, like one guest that I'm going to bring on shortly came from a recommendation from someone. So you want to help support our work, help support this podcast, get direct access to me, get no ads on the podcast, and also help this podcast to grow. Visit the link in the description for our Patreon and Locals community. And lastly, don't forget to visit our sponsor of the show, The Kembo, at thekembo.com to get yourself some cool organite pyramids and tower busters and also jewelry, and help combat those nasty chemtrails and those EMF waves that are bombarding us every single day. Dr. Trupti, thank you very much for being a guest on the Conscious Man 7 podcast. This was an awesome and powerful conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. Loved being here.
Absolutely. To everyone listening, if this conversation helped you understand something you've been normalizing for years in your stress, your body, your relationships, or the role you play in the world, share this episode with someone you care about. Because a lot of people are not broken. They're not lazy. They're not weak. They're patterned. They are dysregulated. And they've never been given the right lens. Subscribe to the Conscious Man 7 podcast. Leave a comment with the stress pattern you recognize most in yourself, and send this to one person who needs to hear that healing may be the doorway to their highest potential. To all of the Conscious Man 7 family around the world, thank you very much for giving me your time today. Thank you for supporting the mission, and thank you for choosing to look inside of you to heal, as it creates a ripple effect in the world. This was another episode of the Conscious Man 7 podcast, the place where we go beyond the veil in search of the truths that they hide from you to help you reclaim your power and step into the truest version of yourself. You are the help that you've been looking for. So remember, folks, keep smiling, keep shining, and keep being the change you want to see. Speak to you soon. Cheers and namaste.